Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Social Media, the Good, the Bad and the Ugly. My name is Martin O'Riordan. I'm the General Manager and Head of Cybersecurity here at Mercury IT. And with me today, I have Chris Haig, our Chief Information Security Officer.
Hi, all.
So today, we just wanted to touch on a few of the home truths around social media and some of the things that you can do to protect both yourself and your family online. This is a little bit different to some of our other webinar series where it's not a large focus on the corporate world, it's a little bit more around your personal life. However, it does have a lot of crossover to the corporate world, and a lot of the tips and tricks that you'll do in your own personal life, you can also apply into the corporate world as well. So look, it is an interactive session, so please post any of your questions into the chat. We'll try and get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So pop those in at any time throughout, and we'll try and get to those. This is our last webinar for the year, so we appreciate all of your support throughout what has been a little bit of interesting times for us, moving all of our events onto an online space. And thank you for being part of that journey with us, and also looking forward to next year where we will start running some hybrid events where we can do partial webinar and part of the time in person. So we'll be looking at that in the new year. So look, today we're just going to get started, and first off, what we're talking about is social media and how that actually impacts our lives. So social media is obviously a pervasive part of our lives now, and certainly we see a lot of information in the media around not just breaches of social media accounts, but also how social media companies are using your information. So Chris, what do you think of how social media companies use the information of their users?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's quite scary. I think it's a case of people understand that it's happening. It's there, but you kind of put it at the back of your mind because you're just using that service. I mean, Facebook is probably a good one. I doubt there's very many people that have actually read their terms of service, for instance. It's just not something people will do.
And not to mention, they also change the terms of service regularly.
Yeah, they do, and they change it all the time. You can go into your security settings, for instance, and your privacy settings, make the changes that you want. For instance, not having your mobile phone visible to just anyone. And Facebook did actually go and change that. They made a change to their terms of service, and it was a new cool function, which was, hey, you can search for anyone based on mobile number. So all of a sudden, and it happened to me, my mobile number was then available to anyone to do a search on. So I was like, oh, hold on a second. That's not very cool. Yeah, so you kind of have to go and look. I generally tell people to make sure that you're checking your privacy settings at least kind of 4 times a year, just quarterly, every 3 months. Just go have a look. Make sure they're still set to something that you would agree with.
And those terms of service, they do make them quite complex and long. So generally no one reads them. They just agree to it and keep moving forward. So they could have had an important change like that, and most people wouldn't even be aware of it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we were speaking about it the other day. When they do make a change to the terms of service, they go, hey, we've made a change to the terms of service, and then they send you the whole terms and services. So it's like this 400-page document, as opposed to, hey, we've made this one change that you should be aware of. I think they are getting better at it. Stuff with like GDPR laws and privacy laws, like in California, etc. They're making them start to do that. They're making them change their terms of services to something someone could actually read and agree to. But I think we are quite a ways off.
Yeah, indeed. So one of my favorite sayings is, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So, and I know that that recent documentary used the same statement, and it really is true because Facebook didn't make profit for many years, and they needed to find a way of monetizing their actual platform, and a big part of that was using the information of the users. So
Absolutely.
that certainly has created a fundamental shift in how how you access free services, would you not think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you do need to be aware. That's one. So, for instance, if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, definitely go and have a watch of that. It just shortcuts you trying to do all the research of exactly how your information is used and why. So, if you haven't given it a watch, do have a go through it, especially if you've got kids. I've got a teenager and a twin daughter. So I definitely sat down with them. I mean, obviously I'm in cybersecurity, so I talk to them a lot about this sort of stuff anyway. But it is good to kind of see how that's being used and what you can do. And I think what's important to point out, Martin, like we said, it's not that you shouldn't use it. I mean, it's a great product. I mean, I love Facebook. I keep in touch with family back in South Africa, family in the UK. So I definitely use it. But what we are saying is just be aware of what they're doing and what steps you can do to actually control that a little bit better. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, exactly, because that is something that we want to try and put out there, is that there are some really good positives around social media. That whole inclusion, that connectivity. There's a lot of information that people can access, but I guess it's just being cautious around what information you're sharing, what you're putting up, and also how much you believe some of the information without necessarily going and sort of verifying it. So look,
Yeah.
one of the key issues we see is that there are so many different social accounts now. You and I spoke with the staff and said, "Oh, how many user accounts do you have?" And they go, "Oh no, I've only got a couple." And
Yeah, it's like 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, and then we started rattling off some other ones, and they're going, "Oh, I've got that. Yeah, I've got that too. Yeah, I've got that." And it's kind of
Absolutely.
that it adds up very quickly, and then you start realizing like those sort of stats where users are averaging 2.5 hours a day online on social media platforms. It certainly is part of our life. It's part of where we're seeing the future. I mean, we've talked before about where restaurants and cafes tend to be heading straight to Facebook as their primary medium for getting out to market.
Absolutely.
Just
Don't even have a
abandoning
website.
that. Abandoning the website scenario altogether. So it's certainly making it difficult not to have a Facebook account or some of these other accounts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I noticed on this image, for instance, where we talk about blogging and all the different, they don't even mention the dating apps on here.
No.
So for the singles out there, there's quite a few dating apps as well that kind of fall into that same category. Again, you talk about how many accounts you have, and people don't actually think about it. They think of generally Facebook, but another one is YouTube. So a lot of people don't kind of feel like that's like a social type thing, but you got to remember the way it's being used and who owns it as well, and how it's being used, because it's feeding you video recommendations all the time, and of course you got all the comments, and you can belong to those groups, and you can follow people, and you can get notifications. So it certainly is part of that social kind of media space. Well, it's certainly manipulating you. Again, go have a watch of the movie.
Yeah, some of those things are a little bit scary around how it targets your search patterns and then starts to feed the next recommendation to you.
Absolutely. And there's not a lot of people that haven't kind of looked up and gone, "Oh, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and what the hell am I watching?" They call it going down the rabbit hole of YouTube.
Absolutely. So let's start talking about how do you control some of your information online. So, we've got a screenshot here of a couple of primary social media platforms, especially for a lot of our listeners who are probably in the corporate world. They probably have a LinkedIn page as well. So, we're talking about Facebook and LinkedIn, and one of the things that we try and talk to everyone about is don't just accept the default security settings on any platform.
Yeah, definitely. Once you get on there, you should definitely go through those settings. There are a lot of them, and obviously we're not going to dig into all the details. We'll be here for hours, but certainly go have a think about what social media platforms you are on. For a lot of people, that is going to be Facebook and LinkedIn from a corporate perspective. So do go have a look at the settings. Facebook has got a lot better now that they actually have a privacy wizard, both on your phone and on the actual website, and it will actually step you through and say, who do you want people to be able to see? So you can, on Facebook, for instance, post to a particular friends group. You can actually start to group your friends. Like I group people by country, for instance. So I'm not going, hey, come and see this webinar to, or whatever, or I'm going to this particular function. And it's no good me telling people, in South Africa about that if it's in Australia. So you can actually group them, or you might group like your work colleagues together versus family and friends, and etc. So those are all things that you do need to go and check. Like I said, there are a lot of settings, but you kind of just need to work your way through it.
So what do you think some of the key things people should be thinking about when they're setting privacy on their accounts?
Look, I think it's all about what you're sharing. I take this from a perspective of more from a hacking perspective. So just to bring it back to that kind of corporate piece, I know we said we were going to talk a lot about just this is your own personal stuff, and it is. But you got to remember that an attack on a company will generally start with an individual, and the way that can happen is. Let's say I'm the hacker and I'm trying to get into this particular organization. It's a medical company and I'm after their medical records so I can go sell them or whatever. So generally what I would do is I'd go, okay, well, who's the CEO or someone with some sort of power within that organization? And generally that will be on their websites. It's got to be in the interim board reports and et cetera, especially if they listed company. So I can look that person up, and I would generally look that person up on Facebook or LinkedIn, get some information. On Facebook, if you're sharing information like, oh, this is your wife, this is the school that you went to, etc., I can now use that information. So for instance, if I go, oh, so this person's partner is listed on Facebook, I could possibly reach out to that person as a friend request and go, oh, we went to the same school together, even though we didn't. But do you remember everyone that you went to school with when it was 20, 30 years ago? So you go, oh, yeah, I'll say yes, and I've got this. So as soon as you friend that person, they've now got access to a lot of information. So now I can grab some of that information, like maybe where your kids go to school, if you're posting that, the ages of them, because you would generally put that, oh, it's so-and-so's graduation, and then I can craft an email, a phishing attack that's very, very specific and send it either to that CEO to click on, or I could send it to their subordinate from the CEO, because I can now replicate their language because I've seen it on Facebook and I've watched it for a while. So it's pretty insidious, and they can get in very, very quickly, because all it's going to take then is for one person to click that wrong link and they're in, right? So
that's one of those key takeaways that we've talked about is don't accept requests from people you don't know. And even if you are a bit suspicious, it's best not to accept it and perhaps find out a bit more information before just accepting those requests, because people are targeting almost everyone online in some way.
Yeah, and they're getting very, very smart about it as well. And this is maybe something for the parents out there as well with kids, etc. And they, like I know of some teenagers, mostly female, but not necessarily, like on Instagram. So, the Instagram blue tick. So that's kind of proving who you are as the blue tick. So you'll find a lot of celebrities, etc., have the blue tick. Well, when they're starting to build up their profile and they're getting followers and etc. So let's say they want to be what they call an Instagram influencer, right? Mm-hmm. So you can get paid by people that create product for you to review it or something like that. And so you actually can make a lot of money off it. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to get Instagram to give you a blue tick. Now what's happening is hackers know that, and they will actually send you a fake email, presumably from Instagram's platform, but it's not, saying, oh, you need to provide this extra information to get the... Well, I'll tell you what, straight away, everybody wants the blue tick, so they don't even check or think. They insta-reply to that with all the information that was asked. So terrible hacking trick, but it really does work.
Yeah, it's really just about being aware. I think that's part of what we're talking about is being aware of these things that are going on and having some strategies in place to mitigate it.
Absolutely. So the takeaway here where you said, well, what are some of the key things? Look at what public can see versus what just your friends can see. So like your posts and things like that.
Yeah, and we've talked before about date of births, because that's obviously one of the key pieces of information for identity theft is date of birth. So about not sharing a date of birth to the public.
Yeah, it's a difficult one on Facebook, for instance, because people want that all those comments on happy birthday because it's your birthday. So if you remove the date of birth, well, I have, but what I say is go like I know who my friends are because they'll still wish me. The other thing you can do though is you can actually just leave the kind of the day and month, so people still say that, and take the year off. But people do tend to make a mistake with that because either you or a friend might post like a graduation picture and go, oh, do you remember this back in like 93, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it can work out.
Or a photo of a cake with the candles on it.
It'll take too long to count mine. So that's
me too. So one of the things that we did want to talk, one of the ugly things, unfortunately, on social media is around misinformation and disinformation. So, and they are different because we are talking about disinformation is quite often state-sponsored, or it's deliberate attempts to try and persuade a different view. We've seen some of that in the US election scenarios.
Absolutely.
And misinformation is just where people are sharing information that they haven't bothered to check. So they might get a sensationalist article about something. They go, oh, that's terrible, I'm going to share that with everyone. But it's just not true because they haven't checked it.
Yeah, I mean, let's give some examples of some of them. So the disinformation one, I suppose the easiest one is the election one, because people have kind of heard a bit about it because of the Cambridge Analytica piece that came out, where they targeted, 80 million users and used the information without their knowledge. But just to kind of give you a very simple way of how this actually worked. So there was obviously a campaign that wanted Trump to win against Hillary Clinton. So talking the 2016 election. So just an example of some of the stuff that went out, right? They, this group or a number of groups would start posting information about how if you were voting for Hillary Clinton, you could actually your vote to this number and it would be counted. And if you were voting for Trump or something, then you would have to go to a voting booth or something stupid like that. Now, think about what that does. There was no text to vote. So everybody that would have backed Hillary, they've just taken out of the game.
Yeah.
So it's pretty insidious. The other one they did is they would wait for the kind of polling day, and people would be in queues, and they would literally send a text message out. So this is almost location-based triggered as well, going, hey, we've noticed the queues are very long, so therefore we're going to allow you to text to vote. So and then they text to vote and leave the queue. So, and unfortunately, people only started realizing this was happening when it was too late. So they kind of needed people there going, oh no, that's fake. Don't stay in the queue and vote. So there's a disinformation type case that was pretty hectic.
Yeah, it's actually quite concerning, because it's easy for people to believe that information because it seems like it's coming from a legitimate source.
Absolutely. Really, really, really does. Misinformation is probably, misinformation is a difficult one, but not too difficult, I suppose. If people just take the time to think a little bit before sending it, and I know it's difficult because humans respond in a particular way. So generally, you're going to get the information, and what you would normally do is you would apply your own kind of background, your social norms to it to kind of explore and then kind of understand, and then you act. So it's a particular loop right? It's called the OODA loop. So generally what will happen is you'll go through those processes and then you'll act. Now the act might be, that's a load of rubbish, I'll move on, I'll keep scrolling. Or you will share that information like to your friends group and go, oh, you should be careful of this because this could happen. Look at this article or whatever it is. Now, the problem with misinformation is it's generally created to provoke an emotional response. So it might be against like the vaccine stuff is just insane at the moment, or the anti-vaxxer type scenario, and then add COVID to that on top of it is just getting ridiculous. So what happens is it provokes an emotional response, and the two bits where you're going to apply your social norms and understanding and research, and it moves directly to act. So what happens is you see it, you get inflamed, and you share it. And then that's how it spreads, and it spreads really, really quickly. And unfortunately, what's being spread is just total rubbish.
And that is a big problem. It spreads so quickly because of those emotional connections that you
and they're so targeted from the emotional stuff. So they will do race-based stuff. So Black Lives Matter, etc. All that stuff, they really do target it. In the US, more specifically, it would be to polarize, between the two parties and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on this about how much information you're putting online, but there's a bit more to that.
It's a good example, though. It's a good example.
It's also about how much you're posting as well, and how broad your connections are. So if you have got public access to your platform or your social media, what information you're putting out there for people to be able to access?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you can see that class of 2019, like a house number. Oh, we've just bought a house, and all that stuff can be a little bit. Yeah, you've got to be a little bit careful with it. I mean, if it is to your friends group and you've got your privacy settings set correctly, that's probably fine. Just coming back to the corporate bit though, do have a think about that. So people within the corporate world, and especially if you're responsible for the policies and that of your organization and its security, you should have a policy around what staff can actually share on the platform. So in most cases, we are talking about LinkedIn in most cases, but do have a think about that as well. You should probably have some policies around what is appropriate to share on those platforms, just in case a staff member is sharing something that they shouldn't. An example might be like, hey, we're working on this big project for this client, and you might inadvertently be giving too much information away about whatever that project is, that could actually expose your client, for instance, to a hacking event. So you just have to be a little bit careful with that.
And there have been a lot of examples where staff have been either terminated because of comments they've made online, or haven't been able to get a job because of things that they've had posted on their social media presence.
Absolutely. I'd just like to point out as well, just like we're talking about stuff online, but do think about physical presence stuff as well. Like the common one that I think we posted it on LinkedIn the other day or a couple of weeks ago, the one about the car on the back with all the stickers, and it's like giving away like what school your kids go to, how many kids you have, what things you're into, etc. And you can, again, there's a lot of targeting that can happen there. But anyway.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we were doing in this particular presentation is extending this to a little bit more about how you help the rest of your family. So children and educating children is a really key one. And one of the things that I've got teenage children as well, and one of the things that we made sure of, my wife and I, that very early on we had conversations around safety online. So even before they started using online platforms, about not sharing information, not telling anyone online their age, where they live, what school they go to, making sure that information is kept quite contained, because they are going to be online. They're going to be playing games. There's a lot of these multiplayer games now around. I mean, Minecraft, Fortnite are a couple of really good examples of it. And people, your children are actually interacting with strangers essentially online quite often.
They'll be like on those chat servers like Discord and things like that. And then there may be parents online that don't even know what Discord is. And this is where you do need to keep talking to your kids, what they're doing, who they're talking to, and making sure that that's just reiterated. That because again, it's generally not going to go anywhere, and trying to ban kids from it is probably not a great idea because then there will be social exclusion, etc. So you've got to like play it really, really carefully. And I think education is the best way to go. I mean, we had a chat about this earlier, Martin, about the Discord stuff that you mentioned, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, so Discord is one of the primary pieces that your kids will be using. So they'll be playing, Fortnite online. But what they'll generally do is they'll have a Discord session, which is basically a voice chat and collaboration tool. And what happens is they'll have their friends on the Discord server or Discord group and actually be talking to them separate to the game. So the game will have a voice function as well. But they'll usually try and have the Discord because they can control a bit more. And to a good degree, it's actually quite good in the space that they can set up a server and only invite their friends onto it. So if they're playing Fortnite with a bunch of other strangers, they don't necessarily need to talk to them. And one of the key takeaways is most of those online platforms have a push-to-talk function on the actual voice functionality of the game itself. And generally, the push-to-talk function is on by default, but it's something that they should know to make sure it's still on, or that if it's not on by default, that they switch it on. Because what that does is when they're chatting in their Discord server, all of that information is not then being spread to the people on the actual Fortnite game itself or whatever game they're playing, where they can hear it as well. So the idea is that. So the idea really is around sort of controlling who they're gaming with as well. But when they're gaming with their friends, that they know who they are. So one of the key things I've always told my children is that know who you're playing the game with. So if it's, and they do spread. So hopefully it's mostly the people that they know in person from school, their school friends, but then it'll be, it's my friend Billy. Well, that's Billy's cousin. That's joined us. I haven't met Billy's cousin because he lives in Brisbane, but then but that's Billy's cousin's friend. Oh, where did Billy's cousin's friend meet the friend? Oh, he met them online. And so alarm bells should start going off. It should be a case of understanding that they can ask those questions, and that they can actually ask, well, where do you know that person from? How do you know them? Have you actually met them in person? Because it's really important that they're gaming in a safe environment. So having those close groups of gaming friends, because they will be doing it. The stats have said that pretty much 6 in 10 kids are already gaming by the time they're 13. So it's quite a common thing for kids to go online and start gaming.
Absolutely, yeah. Alrighty.
And one of the things that I know you and I have talked about, Chris, is having the ability. You've got to really encourage your children to talk to you about anything that's going on, whether it is cyberbullying or that they're getting comments from people, if they're getting in any way, shape or form feeling the effects of some of those, or negative effects of having comments made about them, or not getting enough friend requests, or not getting enough likes on posts. It is a really key takeaway to say they just need to have that comfort to come and talk to the parents. And one thing that I did want to mention is that for cyberbullying for children, at least, the e-safety commissioner, they will actually handle a cyberbullying complaint completely. So that includes talking to the platforms to get posts taken down, blocking users, investigating it. But they only do it for under 18s. But it's a service they offer end to end for those under 18s. Over 18, online abuse is a separate thing, but we can get into a little bit about how you could manage some of those things if you are getting abusive behaviour, because some of the stats say about 40% of people have had some kind of negative impact online, whether that's through comments or unwanted or unsolicited contact and those sorts of things. One of the things that we did want to sort of talk about is location services. I know this is one of your favourite topics, Chris, is location services.
It is. Yeah, definitely chat to my kids about this sort of stuff. So having your location service, look, generally they're not on by default, it should pop up and go, do you want this application to use the location-based services? And don't get me wrong, sometimes it's useful. Like if you're using maps on your phone, you kind of need it. But other stuff you might not want on there, and you need to have a little think about it. Snapchat is a good example. Definitely check this with your kids. They might be like, oh no, I keep the location services on so my friends can find where I am. Okay, fine. Have you gone and looked that you're only sharing that location with your friends though, and it's not public, right? So you could open up Snapchat on your phone, go to the location maps, and you can actually see people and where comments are being made from and things like that. So that area, if you've not thought about it. The other one is obviously Facebook, and Facebook check-ins are a bit scary, I think, as well, because again, depending on your privacy settings, so there's a couple of elements that line up that make it a problem. It's not a problem in itself. So if I go to, I like this example here, what we got Queen's Wharf Hotel or whatever, and someone's checked in there, right? So they go check in. So if your privacy settings are wrong and that's public, then people know that you're away from home, for instance, right? So now you have a kind of burglary at home because they know you out, that kind of thing. So you need to be careful with that. I know my wife likes to do check-ins and that, but what she actually does is she will check in once we get home. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that works.
Yeah, and one of the ones that we weren't aware of was on the screen there as well, is the dating apps, where the location services are on the dating apps, and things like that. You've crossed paths 13 times with one of the people you've been connecting with. And
I don't know if I like that.
I'm not sure. That one was a little bit weird for me, but certainly just checking those location services on your dating apps is probably a good thing to do if you are using those.
Absolutely, and again, you may want to I'm not single, so I can't comment too much on it. But I'm assuming the singles out there, yeah, you probably do want that, right? Like if you're in Tinder or whatever, and you both happen to be in the same bar or nightclub at the same time, that could work, I guess. But just make sure it's something that you want turned on. So definitely go check it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I know we've talked about public and private profiles. I know we've had a couple of examples there. We've heard of 14-year-olds wanting to be social influencers. So they might have an Instagram account that's public because they want that interaction. But then when you actually go back through and look at some of the people who are connecting with your 14-year-old daughter, for instance, could be quite concerning because it's a public profile, so anyone can actually be connecting directly with an underage person.
And directly messaging as well on for instance, like Instagram. So yeah, again, it is an education piece. It's making sure you are talking to your kids and they understand I suppose what could be the negative side of it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with Facebook there, having a public or private, I mean, we would, it would be a really, key thing to just look at whether or not your profile is public, that anyone can actually search it, because I know that on the next slide, where in that corporate space, people can look up someone in LinkedIn, and then they can look up Facebook and see information there. And one of the things about Facebook is pretty much if you look up the name, you'll be able to find that person. That's not blocked, even if it is private.
Definitely. I mean, you can see this example here from our chief sales officer, Sally Ann. So we asked if we could use her details here. But like doing a basic search on LinkedIn, because it's going to be there from a corporate perspective. But then, like I gave that example right in the beginning, but then I go and do the search across the kind of more social platforms, non-corporate world, gather more information there, and then use that as the basis of an attack. So kind of, you just need to be a little bit careful and what's being shared, definitely.
Yeah, and that social engineering part is a key one that we would like, especially to bring that back into that corporate space, is that using the Facebook messenger and being able to connect with someone to build up a profile is certainly a really key thing for people to think about.
Yeah, and It's just some of the stuff that goes in the background, and a lot of people go, okay, well, you're probably taking this too far, like blah blah blah. Yes and no. It depends what you want, and that's what we were talking about. Is at least you need to be aware of it, and you can be in control of it. You might want all these things, and that's fine. So an example would be even the Facebook ads, right? So those ads are very targeted because it's feeding information in from all sorts of places. Do yourself a favor, grab your phone, go into Facebook, go into the settings, go into the privacy settings, and then you can click on an area that actually tells you so it's called off Facebook connectivity or marketing. I can't remember the term they use. And it will show you all the applications that you use that feeds back into Facebook, so Facebook can use that to target ads more. So an example for mine, I'll give you a couple of examples. It would be like, I don't know, I use Dan Murphy's website. I've used Menulog for ordering, for instance. Both of those feed information straight back into Facebook. So then I'm getting those whiskey ads, and I'm getting the ads for this new restaurant or etc., which maybe I want. And I go, well, that's cool. At least it's showing me stuff that interests me. You might not want that, and you need to know that there is the function for you to go in there and let's say delete all the information you have. So it doesn't mean you'll get less ads, unfortunately. It just means you'll get ads that are not targeted at you. So you'll just get ads for arbitrary things like maybe a washing machine. And I've had people go, well, I'd rather have them targeted. At least it's something I'm interested in. And I'm going, yeah, great. It's just you'll have less money at the end of the year as well.
Look, we're going to wrap up soon. I think one of the things that we did need to just touch on briefly is, there are some negative online influences. So certainly that online abuse is something that people do need to think about. And if you are experiencing online abuse, as I mentioned earlier, for children, at least the E-Safety Commissioner will take the lead on that. But if you're an adult, it's a little bit more difficult. Certainly there are, the first steps, of course, are, blocking those people who are, talking to you directly. If the things keep happening, you have to, you can block them again, but also you can contact the platforms themselves and make a complaint. So it's about knowing what you can do. At the end of the day, if it's really serious and life-threatening situations, you'd be needing to contact police and making those complaints formally through the police. It also, one of the things that we do need to just sort of touch on is that image-based abuse. So this was, previously they referred to it as revenge porn, but there's so many different ways that the image-based abuse can actually impact people, and it's not just revenge. So, and that is around that sharing of explicit images, what might be consensual, or it might be something that someone thinks is quite innocuous, can actually be used against them. As we said, once it's online, once you've shared it, once you've sent it to someone else, you don't have control of it anymore. So it's something for people to think about how that works. And certainly, one of the big takeaways from today's session is really about just think before you do anything. Think before you.
Always the case. Yeah. Same with emails and managing your emails and managing those phishing attacks constantly. It's just think about it. Just pause for a second. It's like we all get really busy, and that's what these hackers and criminals want. Is you busy, you kind of click a little bit too quick. Have a think about it. Do you know the person that's in? Are you expecting a link? Are you expecting that file? If not, don't open it, or verify some other way. Pick up the phone, call the person and go, hey, I noticed you sent me this Excel file. I tried to open it and it said it wants to use macros. That's probably a bad idea. So I closed it, and do you need, what's the macros for? You can ask. So
yeah, and that is it. I think it's just, I know you and I have talked about having just a healthy dose of skepticism with a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And again, we just want to make sure we're saying it's not about not using these things. It's not using these platforms. It's just making sure you do a few things just to make the exposure to some of those risks less. They are part of our future. They're here to stay. We're not getting rid of them. We're only seeing more and more of these platforms popping up. So certainly it's about just taking control of it yourself rather than letting the platforms have control.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we'll move on to some Q&A and see what sort of questions is Haley, I think, might have some questions for us. Okay. So I'll find. Haley, did you have any other questions at all? Oh, sorry, we got one here. What are your thoughts on Facebook Workplace?
Yeah, I've not used it, but just knowing how Facebook use information, I'd probably avoid it at this point. I'd have to research that a bit more, but just on the back end and how they use information, I'd be a little bit concerned about what was going on there or in there and around the privacy there, I think.
Yeah.
So it just gives me a bit of an icky feeling.
One of the other, there's a comment here as well that someone has posted around that, you know, password research and IT support, you know, it's something that obviously we do as IT support. So having password resets from a client, you need to make sure that it's the right client, because they mentioned that they had a social engineering incident where an executive password was reset but given to the bad actor rather than to the right person.
Absolutely, it happens all the time. So do check with your provider, your IT provider, that maybe you've got a special password that you use with them, or check that their processes are robust enough that they probably, you know, hang up the call with you and then they call you on the number. Unless you're calling like from a mobile that they already know, so that they can verify something like that. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is. You know, obviously MFA is a good one for that. Is multi-factor authentication, where you might reset the password, but if they don't have access to the multi-factor, then they
Well, that's and it's a big thing. Like, you know, setting up something like a multi-factor authentication on all your platforms is a very good idea. So yes, it is available on Facebook and LinkedIn and etc. And they should be on. If the platform has the availability to switch on an MFA, multi-factor authentication, switch it on, use it. I know it's a hassle, but it's way more a hassle if someone steals your identity and you have to struggle with 2 years of trying to sort that out.
Yeah. So another question here is, what can I do if I think that I've been socially engineered or think I've been victim of a social engineering attack? So I guess in the context of a workplace is probably a little bit different to a personal life, but the fundamentals are similar. I mean, in a workplace, obviously the key one is reporting it to your IT department as soon as possible if you think that you've had some kind of social engineering, because resetting passwords and access and those things would be the key ones. So again, in your personal life, you know, resetting your password if you think you've had some kind of a breach is a good one.
And I think what's very important there is timing. Time is not on your side when something like that has happened. So if you think, oh, you've had this phone call from some person and you gave out some information, hung up, and then you sat down and you went, oh, hold on a second, I didn't, like, you think, okay, I've probably given this information out to the wrong. You have to tell someone as soon as possible, because they will use that information very quickly to either get in or hack, or so the faster that information gets it out there to your IT teams and, you know, those type of people, the better. So don't wait. I think a lot, and unfortunately, I think what a lot of people do is they don't report it for fear of repercussion from the company.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, I know some companies' cultures may be like that, and I honestly hope that changes as we go. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's key to just touch on that password reuse, because we're talking a lot about your personal life at the moment. Is don't reuse passwords at all, for one, and definitely don't reuse passwords you've used for your social accounts in your personal life with your corporate accounts.
Yeah, absolutely, that's a big one.
Because you know, we've seen it time and time again where you know, could be a shopping site or something has had a breach, and their list of usernames and passwords has been stolen, and then people will the hackers will use these to social engineer, look up people with the same username from a corporate site and just have a go and see if the password will actually work for their email.
And then all of a sudden they're logging into your O365 account, so they've got access to all your email, and then they're sending emails on your behalf. It's not good. So yeah, it's a common one called credential stuffing. So definitely no password reuse. Get a password manager.
Password manager. Free. We keep saying it. Password manager.
Password manager. Use it.
So there was one other question. Well, Jamal has asked if you can ask a question, but just if you could post what the question was, Jamal. So my friend's son is 14 and is subscribed to a game through Microsoft Xbox using his mum's credit card. His mum did not know anything about it. She did not even receive an invoice from Microsoft. Her credit card was debited without her knowledge. Is Microsoft in breach of law? Well, it's also about terms of service, unfortunately, and this is where we talked earlier about reading the terms of service. So a lot of the terms of service will put the onus back on the user to make sure that their credit card details are legitimately used. So it's difficult for an organisation like Microsoft or any of those sort of companies to be able to manage whether or not a child will steal a parent's credit card.
It's very difficult for the company to know that it was the child that put it in, right? So that's I think the difficulty there. I have heard of instances, I think with the Apple Store, I have heard of instances where they've kind of credited it back. That's somebody I know as well. So that's
exactly. And the first step would be to contact the company.
Yeah,
because they quite often, those large companies do have really strong corporate governance and social governance policies in place. So if they have actually had an issue, they would generally try and do something about it if they can.
They will.
It might also come down to how long ago. So if very soon thereafter, it may be different.
Yeah, not like they've been playing the game for 2 years and now they've gone.
I know the difficulty here is obviously saying that there was no invoice or receipt sent.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of one of those scenarios where you kind of also need to be checking your credit card statements, unfortunately. At least glance over them on a regular basis just so you know whether or not anything.
That's a tough one. That is a tough one.
And what about an SSO service versus password manager in a business scenario? So I guess that's a good point, that there are, single sign-on can be a good option in a corporate environment to try and minimize some of those reuse. I think one of the things that what we've seen is certainly in the corporate world is there's so many SaaS-based products out there now, is having the right product sets to try and manage that. So you might think about like a cloud access security broker might be something that a corporate environment might think about.
Good points, yeah.
Yeah. And just here, please note privacy policies for Microsoft are different around consumer services and business. Yeah, it's a good point too. Yeah, they absolutely are, and pretty much for any company that's offering business services versus retail, they are very, very different
they will.
engagements. So mindful of time, so I do really appreciate everyone's time today, and certainly
thanks everyone for joining.
Support over the year. I just wanted a big shout out to Hayley, our events coordinator, and Alicia, our marketing manager, who have put all of these webinars together, and they've just done an amazing job. So I really wanted to just highlight how appreciative we are for all of the work that they've done in putting all of these things through to get to today and all of the previous webinars. So thank you both, Hayley and Alicia. And thank you, everyone. If you do have other questions afterwards, you can always reach out to us as well. Happy to answer any questions you might have. And we'll see you all again next time.
Awesome.
Thank you. See ya.